Welcome back to the Discovering Commercial Real Estate podcast. We have veteran investment sales broker and founding partner of Ariel Property Advisors, Victor Sozio, here with us today. Victor, thanks again for coming on. I really appreciate this.
Thank you, John. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So before we talk business, give us a little rundown of your background. So where are you from and why did you get into this industry?
Sure. Well, I was born in the Bronx to my parents who emigrated here from Italy. We lived there until I was 15. We moved to Lower Westchester.
Hmm.
When I graduated high school, I was 17 years old, and I enlisted in the United States Marine Corps Reserve. And looking back at it now, that was probably the first time I had to push someone to sign a contract.
Right.
My parents specifically. The reason was that you have to be 18 to enlist in the military. If you're 17, you need a guardian's sign off. And I campaigned for years. They knew it was something I was set on. My recruiter came to the house and campaigned, but my mom was staunchly opposed.
Mm,
And ultimately, the deal that we worked was trying to get the best of both worlds. That I would enlist in the Marine Corps Reserve, but I would also go to college. And credit to her, it was a critical juncture in my life, a pivotal decision. She did what she thought was in my best interest, and I do think that it set me on the right path for the future.
awesome.
So after high school, I went to boot camp. I went to School of Infantry. After School of Infantry was over, I came back to New York. I started doing my reserve training, which is 1 week in the month, 2 weeks in the summer, and started going to Marist College. And Marist was a great college, great experience. Was having a lot of fun there, probably too much fun. Um, and then September 11th happened, and our unit got activated, which ended up being in totality for a few
Right.
years. It included a deployment to Kuwait and Iraq. When we came back, I decided to finish my degree at Manhattan College. Um, and at Manhattan College, one day I was strolling past Career Services Department. I saw a posting for an internship at Massey Knuckle. I applied, and that was my entrance into the commercial real estate world.
Awesome. Great. And so you served as a corporal all throughout college. Can you kind of walk us through how this experience kind of shaped you as an individual and as a businessman from that point on?
Sure. A lot of the principles that are instilled in the military, I think, can be applicable to all facets of life. I mean, discipline clearly, and I needed that discipline, right? I needed it from high school. I was kind of, not floundering, but I needed some structure, and the discipline was great. But the ability to adapt, or building the skills that allow you to adapt to the terrain in any given instance, is critical,
Mm,
right? And that's something that we talk about as a company all the time, especially now when the market changes at the drop of a hat. That's a critical skill. Resilience is a huge thing that you learn in the military, and you need in life,
right.
absolutely need in life. You definitely need it in the military, because sometimes they send you places or do things that are way outside of your control. So the resilience was there, and ultimately the camaraderie and relationships as well, right? Some of the camaraderie you build in those circumstances are, it's hard to compare in the real world,
Right.
But if you think about our business, we're a relationship business, right? We talk about it at Ariel all the time, right? Yeah, there's transactions, and that's how we make our money. But more than anything else, this is a relationship business. And you do build those relationships in the military as well. Like right now, in a week, we have a 20-year anniversary coming up
Oh, wow.
from when we went into Iraq, and
Okay.
we're all looking forward to seeing each other and hanging out.
Awesome. Great. And so when you interviewed for your position at Massey Knuckle with Shimon, how did you kind of connect with him and show him that you were the right person for the job?
Um, Yeah, it was my second interview there. I interviewed with HR first, and then it was Shimon. And I think my partner now, Ivan Petrovic, might have been in that meeting as well. And we did have a shared connection with the military.
Hmm.
He was an IDF, and I think that helped. But ultimately, I just remember being sincere,
Mm,
right? That I was hungry. I wanted to work hard. I didn't know anything,
right.
right? I mean, I knew a little bit about commercial real estate, but I really didn't know anything, right?
And you communicated that to
And
him.
I communicated that to him, and that I wanted a chance and I would work hard, and ultimately they offered the internship. So
Awesome. Perfect.
I'm grateful, to this day that uh, that I started in that internship position, because you know what? That was really the ground floor of this industry. I
Right.
was in the back room. For those who remember Massinacco, we had a copy room in the back, and I would do the postcards and the mailers, and really learn from the bottom our industry. And I think that was valuable for me.
So Massinacco really set the right foundation for you for the rest of your career.
Absolutely.
Awesome.
Massinacco was a great atmosphere, great people to learn from, and absorb. It was very transactional, which in this industry is huge. There's no substitute for experience
Right.
in this industry, right? There's so many young, talented people in our industry that want to get into the industry, but the transaction volume, being in the trenches over and over again on these deals, that's important. And what Massinacco provided was a lot of transaction volume, and that was critical.
Awesome. Understood. And I want to understand where you kind of first develop your sense of business. So if you had to think back to the first time you remember selling something, what comes to mind?
Um, well, first thing I remember, the first assignments I was on, I would take a lot of time just practicing my pitch,
Mm,
right? Writing it down in a book, thinking through it, really gaming it out, right? And even before that, I would first try to be as knowledgeable as possible, right? Understand the product that I'm selling, understand the comps, understand what's going on in the area. Then I would write my pitch. Then when I had a call list or I thought about who I was calling, I would try to find out as much as I can about that person
right.
before I called, right? And in my mind, again, I would game it out and game it out again. And when then I started calling and communicating with these people, then my approach was I would have my pitch. I always remember I wanted to be brief, right? These were important people, sophisticated people. They didn't know me from anything, right? So I remember always being, I got to be brief. Say my name, what where I'm calling from, who I am, right? Why I'm calling. Just get it out there
Right.
quickly and see if they engage. And that worked for me. And I was always very, again, sincere, because there's sometimes this misconception in our industry that you have to kind of
Sell and
sell something
convince.
that maybe not be completely truthful,
Right.
or hide the facts. My approach was totally different. I actually, and to this day, I think even if a listing is a higher price than most of the market, there's probably someone or out there that has a specific value
Definitely.
proposition or an angle is a perfect fit for it. So again, I just try to be as knowledgeable as I can on the details, what the different approaches can be, what the business plan can be, communicate it effectively and honestly, and that ultimately worked.
Perfect. Awesome. And we talked before this about how in this current market, you have to be creative with every deal that you put together. Can you walk us through a deal that kind of stands out to you where you had to think outside of the box to put it together?
Sure. We talked about, I mean, every deal right now, we have to think outside the
Right.
box, but there was a recent deal that we sold, infamous deal up on One Bennett in Washington Heights. It was originally done 10 years ago. The
Mm,
developer, who assembled great piece of land, very, very difficult terrain, really a mountain of bedrock. You look at it today, it's still a mountain of bedrock. And but they also did a deal with the adjacent synagogue, right? And took their air rights. We're supposed to develop the synagogue for them. Things went horribly wrong, right? The recession happened. The developer, probably took on more than they can
mm,
execute on. Fast forward 10 years later, we were brought in to sell it from the bank that ultimately took it back. And the synagogue was still there, and the synagogue really needed to find a home, right? But they were expecting the home to be in this new development. And from marketing it, we realized this is not going to happen, right? Like, this, we kept trying, banging our head, trying to get a developer with to satisfy the objectives of the synagogue. And finally, when we said, you know what, let's take a step back. Let's get a bunch of different schematics of what can be done here. Let's start talking to the board at the synagogue about
mm,
really what their options are and game it out with them, right? And that was something that was really helpful, because when they saw, okay, when the market saw this is what can be built, with clarity, and here's the challenges with the terrain and the bedrock,
hmm.
and when the synagogue started to realize, you know what, maybe we're better just getting a check and getting our own new
I
home,
see.
that's was finally what we needed to do to get it, across the finish line. So,
Understood.
but again, like all these deals, you have to think outside the box, right? I mean, we have, when we deal with some complex assignments in the affordable housing world. So, there's a lot of time. beautiful thing about our industry is there's experts in all different fields, right? So, and it's okay to not know everything,
Right.
right? And it's okay to leverage the relationships of the people that do to help you execute and collaborate as a team to execute.
100%. Awesome. And speaking of the affordable housing sector, can you walk us through the 1904 affordable unit portfolio that you sold in South Bronx for 350 million? How did this come about, and how did you go about finding the right buyer for this?
Great question, and I love that portfolio. The seller was PRC, and is actually somebody that we dealt with for many years. Great family run organization. They they had this portfolio actually generational. It was a generation before. They had this great portfolio in the Bronx, predominantly project based Section 8 assets. And they knew that we have a pretty good presence and expertise in the affordable world. But these were complex assignments,
Mm,
right? So they were getting solicited from people all the time wanting to buy their assignments. But these were GP positions in some cases. You know, in one case, they were still being placed in service from a mix and match family deal. So when the solicitation started to ramp up and the numbers started getting to a point where they're like, hey, you know what? Maybe we should consider
yeah,
selling it.
disposing.
They called us
Yeah.
to analyze it. And credit to the team we have at Ariel. I mean, Remy Mandel, who's a director of research and sales, you know, we worked hard, and other analysts as well. We worked for months to analyze it, right? And what we found out is that, you know, for these type of portfolios of that scale, there's accounting firms that will charge an arm and a leg just to analyze it,
Right.
right? We did it for free. It took us months, but we did it for free because we wanted the business. And after we analyzed it, we talked through it and, you know, really understood it. That's when we listed it. We went out to market, you know, and it was a process that I'll tell you, even though they were complex, I think it showed how much demand there is in the affordable housing
Mm,
world. You know,
okay.
not only from private capital, but from institutions that have mission driven capital, ESG capital, whatever the case might be. You know, again, for something this complex and nuanced, when we set out, we said, you know, it was a 300 plus $1 million deal. We said, okay, if we have five or so real qualified
Buyers.
bids,
Yeah.
like real qualified, like just to understand these portfolios take an immense amount of time, right? If we have five qualified bids, we'll be happy. When the process was all said and done, we had about 15, right? And
Wow.
Shimon and I, you know, we looked at each other and was like, wow, this just
Wow.
shows you that, you know, the buyer pool for this product type has really exploded over the course of the last 15 to 20 years.
Definitely. 100%. And the $340 million seven building multifamily package in Savoy Park. How did you go about sourcing and executing on this deal?
So that one was a little bit different than the normal assignment. Um, and you know what? I'll even go a few years before that and where it really started because we were in a meeting, we were pitching an assignment, a typical like 40-ish $1 million assignment. But at that meeting, a property down on Cherry Street came up, 275 Cherry Street. And it was project based Section 8. They tried to sell it for, you know, 280 million. They
Mm,
didn't sell it.
mm,
But, you know, they gave us kind of a lead and said, "Oh, you know, if you have any ideas for it, let us know." We ended up doing that deal, right? And, you know, I think that gave us as a firm and as people confidence like, "Hey, we can play in this space. We
hmm.
could compete here. We
Yeah.
understand this product as good as anybody. You know, we could do this." So now fast forward, you know, we did some other bigger deals in the affordable world. Now fast forward to 2016, I think it was, right? Um, and L&M and Savannah took back this property. You know, Vantage was the one that had it before. They put an Article 11
Mm,
on it, and they were ready to either recap or sell. Um, a few, maybe a year prior to that, we started establishing a great relationship with Fairstead. Um, and when they were ready to sell it, they let us know we have a great relationship with L&M, and we competed for it, but
mm,
we didn't win it,
I see.
right? You know, and you know, I don't blame them too much, but it was because it was a recap and a sale, and frankly, I had the idea that, you know, you want max proceeds on something, you probably got to sell it,
Right.
right? You want max, you know, recap is hard to get max proceeds on something. So they were about to list it, and I have a good friend Eben Ellertson at L&M, and I spoke to him and I said, listen, I think I have a great buyer for this.
Mm,
This is not something we typically do outside of an exclusive assignment. Talk to them, see what they're willing to do, run your process. At least you get a data point,
right.
you know? So they did that. We got a great offer from Fairstead. And what's great about Fairstead, and even to this day, is like they're able to move quickly when they want something, and the institutions now as well. But back then, the institutions, they wanted due diligence. They needed 30, 60 days, etc. They gave an offer that they could execute on quickly. Didn't They said thank you. We're going to run our process. But we kept on it, kept kind of keeping tabs on it. And I had a feeling that when it was all said and done, their price was good, but especially their terms were good.
Mm,
So they ran their process at the end. They came back to us, we negotiated a deal, and the rest is history.
awesome. Perfect. And what have you learned about commercial real estate investment from selling over $5 billion in assets throughout your career? How do you approach acquisitions for your own portfolio now?
Well, what I learned is it's a roller coaster business,
Hmm.
right? And that's why it's important to build the right habits and systems that you don't get too high, you don't on the wins, you don't get too low on the losses. My wife, it's great to have a great support system too, right? Because my
Right.
wife, again, giving her credit, she's been great. She knows when I have a great win, she's like great, but she's not like going ecstatic over the moon. But and when I have a big loss, she says that's the business, Vic,
Right.
right? And she's absolutely right. That is the business. It ebbs and flows. It's a roller coaster. You just got to stick with it, build the right systems and habits to make sure that you incrementally increase that pipeline,
Mm,
right? And that's, as brokers, we need to have a good pipeline at all time. And that pipeline means leads coming in
mm,
for new business, assignments that have a legitimate chance to get to contract,
right.
realistic sellers with motivation, and deals that are in contract and ready to close, right? So you got to maintain that pipeline. In terms of how I approach investments for myself, first off, I don't like to do anything that would conflict with our
Mm,
our, our business. We put a lot of energy into building Ariel, and we don't want to do anything that would show that we conflict. So never a deal that we sell would we invest in. Um, and when I am considering something, it's always on the passive side. I know I don't have enough time to
right.
run a deal. It's got to be passive, so the deal has to make sense, and the sponsor has to be credible and someone I have a good relationship
Right.
with that I can call, because nothing would make me more concerned than giving a slug as an investment. It goes into a black hole where you don't know what's happening,
Right.
right? I need someone that's going to communicate what's happening if we're going to put money out. And again, it's going to be passive. We can't run the deal at
100%.
the time.
So would you say to you the operator is more important than the asset itself?
I think they're equally important.
Okay.
Deal needs to make sense, but sponsor, they go hand in hand
Got it. Okay.
to me.
Understood. And as a broker, how is selling affordable housing different from transaction on a fully free market building? How is this process kind of different on your end?
Um, the buyer pool is different.
Mm,
The nuances are way different, right? Selling a free market building is, sometimes they have their own complexities as well, but it's pretty straightforward,
right.
right? Affordable, there's so many different kinds of affordable, quote unquote affordable is a broad category that has many, many different product types in it. And I don't think I will ever be in the business long enough to understand every nuance
Everything.
of
Yeah.
every product type in affordable world. Right? And that's the beauty of it. That's why I love it so much is you're learning every day, right? Like every time you get a new assignment, you can learn on it, and the policies change all the time. So you really have to be on top of the policies. What business plan can be
Mm,
implemented for it. Another thing, which is a pitfall, is there's a lot of landmines in affordable housing, right? Whether it's consents, sometimes you need city, state agency consent, sometimes you need tax credit investor consent, and you do your best to structure the deal accordingly.
mm,
But even if you have a hard deposit, sometimes you can be 6, 8 months into a deal and it blows up,
got it.
right? So there's an inherent kind of danger in dealing with the affordable world as well. But I love it, right? And
Awesome.
I think it is more of a unique skill set, which I think is an advantage in our
Definitely.
industry. So I love it, and you know what? It's a rewarding thing as well, right? You talk about PRC deal, or we sold another big portfolio for Martin Dunn recently, and when you execute for the client, they're happy, but you also do a transaction where it goes from a good steward of the property to another good steward of the
Mm,
property, and they're implementing all these new initiatives to upgrade the property and enhance
build a community.
the building and the community for
Yeah.
the tenants. It's rewarding,
Yeah.
right? And sometimes you don't get that on the free market, in a rent stabilized transaction as much.
Definitely. And when it comes to development sites of affordable housing, how do you go about presenting a site correctly to ensure that a buyer knows what they're getting into.
And this applies not only for affordable housing, but for all
Right.
developments. I think, you want to first, it starts with having a good baseline set of information, right? Whether it's a draft massing and zoning analysis, you really need to have somewhere to start. Every development is different, and even One Bennett, which I mentioned to you, we had 5 schematics from Michael Parlay, who's a great development consultant, by the way. And, but realistically, there could have been 100 schematics, right? But you want to start, it's like you don't want to go too much, right? But you want to have a good baseline understanding of what can be built, what the zoning is. So you start with the massing and a zoning analysis, but then ideally, and not all situations have this, but ideally you'll have third party reports,
Mm,
right? Because us as marketers and brokers, we want as much surety of close as possible, right? And certainty of execution in that contract. And it's hard to get that in the same way if you don't have some of those third party reports.
definitely.
So sometimes if we have clients that tell us like, do you want a phase one on this? Yes, I do want a phase one, right? Do you want a zoning analysis? Yeah, yeah. Give me everything you have because I want to put it in a data room. I want to streamline the interest from the market.
Right.
So I could start lining up the options and understand, what works, what doesn't, and make a deal there.
Understood.
And when it comes to for the affordable housing, we actually have some big sites for affordable housing that are earmarked for affordable housing. I think it's also understanding what is out there,
Mm,
right? What's the lay of the land for tax benefits, whether it's 420C or Article 11, right? What term sheets are available at HPD or
mm,
HDC? If you're outside of the city and it's a state deal, what does HFA have available? What
right.
are their priorities? Like I think it's important to get as knowledgeable as possible about what the options are for the not only for your client but for the developers.
Understood. Got it. And with the expiration of the 421A tax exemption, how have you seen developer sentiment kind of shift with the government intervention? Does this still make sense for the most part to build affordable housing in New York City?
Well, to build affordable housing, it definitely does make sense. That's not the issue. The issue is the queue. To get into the queue and to, from start to finish takes forever.
Right.
And it's fraught with, roller coaster, just like our industry, right? Things change at the drop of a hat and it's a tough execution. But it makes sense,
Mm,
right? And we need it. We need a ton of supply. And what's happened with the 421A is a shame, right? And I'm hoping that a successor comes along soon because
to
it's
change that.
absolutely
Yeah.
needed. You see that development activity is already dropping significantly. You see that subcontractors are already the first kind of ones to start to feel the effect
Mm,
of development slowing down. So we absolutely need the 421A, and I'll go a step further. Even for the one that we had that sunset back in June, they need to extend that timeline,
right.
right? Because right now it's already tight to get into a new project, even if the 421A is preserved and turn it around and deliver a C of O by 2026. It's really tight. So from my perspective, it will be good for the legislators to extend that
Extend it.
deadline.
Yeah.
And I think it's a layup, right? Why not extend the deadline? Just why make it that much harder? But we'll see what happens.
Definitely. And how would you how what advice would you give to new developers kind of navigating this world of government intervention if it's out of their control?
It's a great question, and they talk about the triggers for stress and lack of control is
Right.
one of the top ones, right? I would say to them to, and this is a saying we had in the military, like embrace the suck,
Right.
right? Like know that you're getting into something that, there's a lot of things that are out of your control
right.
and just to expect it, right? And you will probably have dead deal costs over and over again, but you need to make a commitment if that's what you're going to do. Especially in affordable housing, you got to embrace the suck. You got to sign up for the blood, sweat, and tears that it's going to take you to get to the end
Definitely.
point,
Part
right?
of the
And it's
job.
lucrative. You get there, it's lucrative, it's rewarding. It's needed in the city, but you gotta be ready for the blood, sweat, and tears to get there. So that's
100%.
that would be my number one advice to them.
Got it. And can you walk us through a deal that you were very confident in that didn't go as planned? What would you have done differently?
Um, One that comes to mind is actually a small one in the pandemic that I thought would be an easy layup type of thing. So the pandemic happened and hard contract, forgot hard contract didn't mean a thing, right? Things blew up left and right. Transactions really came to a standstill. But again, one of the benefits about being a broker is that you can go where there is action. If there's action, you can go there, right?
Right.
And I remember what we did. We started selling easements for antenna income, right? Because there was an institution that was buying them, and there was a need, and there was people that were willing to sell. They were paying good numbers, so we started selling them. And and right around that time, there was like a $5 million multifamily deal that popped up in Hamilton Heights, and it was something I sold to the guy years ago. We had a good relationship. We always got along well. And he told me, I want to sell it. My brother doesn't want to give an exclusive. And, but I really want to sell it. And, do you think you could just slam dunk it for me? And I almost never take a non-exclusive assignment
Mm,
unless it's like a Savoy, right?
right.
$340 million. I had an angle there, et cetera. But I thought it was easy. I thought it was a slam dunk. I had a buyer right on, ready that I knew would jump all over on the price. And he did, right? Fast forward a week and a half, 2 weeks, where I'm pushing to get the contract signed because it was at the finish line. And the seller, who I thought I had a good relationship with, that, we had this kind of reciprocal trust factor, tells me he had another deal.
Oh, wow.
And, 2 days later, he ends up going with that other deal, even
Mm,
though the price was like minimally different, and so that wasn't what was expected.
right,
And it just kind of reinforced to me why we have the business plan that we do, right? And even when it sometimes seems like it's a layup, it could go wrong. And for me, forget about the deal. It was a small deal, commission wasn't huge or whatever. It was not a life changer in any sense
right,
of the word, but it's about credibility, right? And spending the time and working with, people and relationships that you like. And, it just reinforced to me, I'm not putting myself in that
right.
position, again.
So it kind of reminded you of your business principles of kind of having the exclusivity upfront before you kind of go into it.
Yeah, even when it seems like it's, logical and
Yeah,
whatever, especially for $5 million
you
deal,
stick to your principles.
stick to the
Right,
principles. Yep.
100%. And what have you learned about yourself since you've closed your first deal?
Um, hmm, since I closed my first deal, what have I learned about myself? I learned that this is a business that is immensely scalable,
Mm,
right? Meaning whether it's brokering deals, right? Investing in deals, speaking intelligently to family members about their real estate issues, or, wherever the case might be. It's just so applicable in our everyday life, right? That what I learned is that, yes, this is good for having a business and making money, but it's going to serve a lot of different purposes
mm,
outside of our core
of
business, whether
course.
it's, again, investing or just being a resource for people throughout. And I think that more than anything else is what resonates with us a lot, is that we're advisors, we're
Right.
resources, right? Like, and that's why you always want to give the right, honest advice, because I don't care about that immediate transaction. I want that relationship,
Relationship.
right?
Yeah.
If that's a small, if that's a transaction and they have an offer that's 10% higher than what we think, take it, right? Like, we want to tell you the right advice
Mm,
because we want your relationship for the long term, not that just immediate business.
definitely. 100%. And if you had to hone the skills of negotiation down, how would you kind of, what is the secret to effective negotiation?
I think establishing trust and what's the right word, reciprocity, right? Or is that even a word? But reciprocal nature, right?
Right.
Meaning, like, I give you information, honest information, you give me honest
Yeah.
information, right? And I think that's a critical factor in a good negotiation, establishing that kind of rapport, understanding. Sometimes it's like a chess match
Mm,
as well, right? Like, and you have to sometimes think 2 steps ahead,
definitely.
right? Like, what are we talking about now, and what's this going to lead to next week, right? After we see the property, after they review and everything else. So, and the other thing, and I say this to our people all the time, is before you just pick up that call, react and pick up that call and start talking, take a step back, take a
Yeah.
breath, right? And think about what's going to happen in that conversation. Because guess what? These conversations are important, right? And one sentence could be the difference between making a deal and not making a
Sure.
deal.
Yeah.
So, I learned from some great people throughout, and that's another beauty of our industry. There's so many great people that you learn from, whether it's people you work with or clients. And, from some of them, I've learned, be a little bit more deliberate. It's okay to
Mm,
be a little bit more deliberate sometimes. Instead of rushing, we're always rushing. We want to do so much, so much. Sometimes it's okay to
step it back.
take a
Yeah.
step back, think about it, and then sometimes, like, use a partner as a sounding board. Right, that's hugely important to me.
Mm,
Right, like, there's so many times where we get stuck in our own head or lost in the sauce, right? You're in a transaction and you're feeling a certain type of way. All these factors come into play, right? And taking a step back and using somebody that you trust as a sounding board,
Right.
I think is hugely important.
Awesome.
So all
Perfect.
these things matter.
Yep. And how has the world of investment sales changed since you started? What worked for a broker 15 years ago, does that still work today?
Absolutely not. I mean, well, let me take a step back. It's evolved, right? And some of the principles still work,
Remain. Yeah.
right? And some of them are completely different.
Right.
I think one of the main things that have changed from the beginning to now is due diligence, right? Now buyers have to be a lot smarter on what they're buying. When I first got into the business, I would call people, all right, 9 times, 10 times, send me a contract. That's it, right? 9 times, 10 times, and you would have a contract signed. Now, because of legislation and the banks and everything else, you have to be a lot smarter
Mm,
and doing your due diligence. And there's a lot of opportunities for these deals to fall apart,
definitely.
right? So you have to have many irons in the fire at any given point. Even you sent that contract out, there's no guarantee that's going to go
Yeah.
through,
Yeah.
right? You have a long sending out a contract and getting a signed contract and then closing. There's a long road, from start to finish. So you want to make sure you're tracking it the right way. That you have, before you get into a hard contract, that you have multiple options for the client, and that you want to streamline their due diligence because that's going to happen now. These deals used to happen in a flash,
Yeah.
right? A week, 2 weeks, we're signing a contract. Now we just had a big deal, that went under contract. Took months to get into contract, and you want to pull your hair out, but you got to be patient. You got to go through the steps, but you got to have options along the way.
Understood. And how much of investment sales brokerage comes down to understanding people, and how much of it comes down to understanding the asset? Would you say it's an even mix of these two things that makes a good broker?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's a good point. It is an even mix because I think about it, especially when times are turbulent
Yeah.
like they are now, the asset is important, but the relationship with that group
It's more important.
is important
Yeah.
too, right? Like, I think about the deals we do and yeah, there's new entrants all the time and but you cultivate that relationship even with the new entrant,
Right.
right? So you can't do a deal without a relationship, without establishing a relationship or having a pre-existing relationship. And a lot of the deals we do are repeat, whether it's a repeat seller or a repeat buyer, you know, um, so it's critically important. The deal too, right? Like the deal makes, the deal has to stand
Yeah.
on its own, but the relationship has to be there to get a deal done.
Got it. Understood. And can you tell us a little bit about Ariel Property Advisors? You mentioned in an interview that this was a natural progression for you getting into this. So walk us through why you decided to go off on your own and open a brokerage firm.
Yeah, well, so Ariel, I mean, just to give a little bit about Ariel, we're 60 plus people today. We have divisions on investment sales. They represent sellers of all the different product types in New York. We have a strong presence in multifamily and development sites. We have a capital services division that helps secure debt and equity,
Right.
and that's national, right? They could do that across the country. And we have a very robust research department. That research department is very important to us. They're analysts, the graphic
Mm,
designers, really the support staff that makes us as salespeople much more effective. When we were at Massey Knuckle, it was about 2010. I actually think that we survived the recession pretty well, and I think we were beneficiaries of being in Northern Manhattan at
mm,
the time. That was our territory, and having a lot of affordable housing product, and that still traded even during the recession. And in 2010, we continued to build a team. We continued to evolve as salespeople, both you know Shimon, myself, Mike Tortorici,
right.
Ivan Petrovic, who's our operations partner. He is the engine, right? He is a force multiplier to its truest sense, right? But we looked around and we said, you know what? We want to spread our wings, right? And we think we have the ability to originate throughout the
Mm,
city. We want to do this on our own. So we started up Ariel, and 12 years later, here we are today, and it was great, and just having some, and having something that, especially in this world now that ebbs and flows all the time, that is small to mid-size and nimble
mm,
is great for us, right? Because we were able to adapt to the terrain, right? We talked about
yeah.
adapting to the terrain.
Yeah.
Much more easy to adapt to the terrain when you're small and nimble,
Sure. Yeah.
right? And that's really paid dividends for us. Our research department pays a ton of dividends, because our approach is let's be that resource. Let's give as much as we can, as much information. We deal with information,
Right.
market intelligence and information. Let's give as much as we can, right, to establish those relationships and give back. And what happens is over time, those seeds sprout, right? Like so sometimes the deals that we're doing now were seeds that we planted 9 years ago,
Yeah.
right? And that's okay, right? And that was our model, that was our business model, right? Is let's be that resource. Let's have that research department. Let's track all the data. Let's
Mm,
give these market reports and let's build a presence that way. And now it's starting to really,
awesome.
show.
Perfect. And what do you look for in a new hire for your firm?
Oh, um, we look, well, certainly tenacity, right? You need it in this industry. And I'll just say that, it's hard to really truly get a sense of someone
Right.
in an interview, right? Because we have so many great interviews. They come with the highest form of education, great resume, right? You hire them, a week later, they move back to another state.
Mm,
It's not for them, right? But what you want to see is somebody that can think on the fly, right? Can has the right energy,
mm,
right? We're very much more aware, as I get older, I get aware of energy, the energy I'm putting out, the energy I'm taking in, the
sure.
energy I'm letting flow through me, has the right energy, um, and is ready to chop wood, right? You're someone that you have a feeling is going to really like put their head down, wants to build a business,
Sure.
and knowing that it's going to take, the 10,000 hour rule certainly applies in our industry too, right? It's going to take years before you really, really hit your stride in this industry. And somebody has to come in with that mindset.
Long term
If they're
mindset.
coming in with the mindset, like, yeah, I want to be, top producing broker in 6 months, 12 months, it's not realistic, pal, right? Like, so, someone needs to come in with the right approach that they're going to grind it out. They're going to grind it out no matter what the case might be.
Got it. Understood. And I want to ask, when hiring people straight out of college, you have to spend all the resources and kind of invest into the new hire
hmm
with no guarantee that it's going to pay off.
hmm
How do you manage that risk as a principal and kind of limit your downside?
Well, I think having a manager for our investment sales
Mm,
and our capital services division, Paul McCormick, who's great, recently became a partner, is what's needed there, right? Because Shimon and I, we can't do that,
right.
right? We can't, shepherd the training and everything else. And Paul has been great, along with Ivan and everybody else, in establishing a really good training
Mm,
program. And you're absolutely right. And that's our risk, right? When we hire somebody, our risk is the resources and bandwidth and effort
no
that we're going to put
guarantees.
in
Yeah.
for months, and with no guarantees,
Yeah.
right? But we do that. We think it's important. We want to really set up the people with the right foundation, and the foundation starts with knowledge,
Mm,
right, on the analytical side, then on the sales side, right, then exposure, right, and exposure with senior guidance, right, and that senior guidance could come from Paul,
mm,
who's an industry veteran and has seen it all, right, but also the individual brokers in the company,
got it.
right? And you really want to set it up for success because our industry is hard, right? Our industry is hard. It's one of the most competitive, industries in the world, in my
Definitely.
opinion, right? So you want to really set up someone as much as you can for success. Doesn't always work,
Right.
but it gives you the best chance that way.
Understood. Got it. And let's say someone watching this right now is graduating college this semester and looking to be a commercial real estate broker in New York City and beyond. What property type do you think they should specialize in that has the most potential for growth in the coming decade?
I'm a big believer in
Okay.
multifamily. I think everybody needs a place to live, right? So multifamily to me is always the premier
Right.
asset class. Um, but I do think industrial has its merits. I'm not an
Mm,
industrial expert by any stretch of the imagination, but I think has its merit. It also depends on what market you're in,
right.
right? Like, and I would say for that person getting out of college, really study the market and where the trends
Mm,
might be and where the product exists, right? Like, not only what the trends will be, where what might be developed here, but what exists, like what product type is out there, like how many multifamily buildings are
mm,
there, what size are they, right? How many different owners are in your market? Really study that market and then approach again as brokers, go to the hotspot,
yeah.
right? Go to where the action is. Don't try to put a circle into a square hole, right? Or whatever the case, like
Yeah.
so research it, think about the product. I love multifamily. I think people will always need a place to live. So I'm always inclined to that, but I think it is market dependent.
Understood. Got it. And if you had to go back and do it all over again, start your career again from scratch, how would you go about becoming a legend in this space?
Um, I think it's hard to go back and envision something like that, but you know what? I would implement some of the systems and habits that have more come to mind in the past 3 or 4 or 5 years. I would implement them right from the start,
Right.
right? And that would be the major difference, you know. But it's easy to say that once you have the
Sure.
knowledge,
Yeah.
right, and an experience of living through that, right? But as a young person in the industry,
You never know how things are going to
you
work
never
out.
know how things you don't know what habits you need to build,
Right.
right? Like, and that's what I would say. A great book that I read, during the pandemic, and to me was a life changer for me, was Atomic Habits,
Mm,
right? And the idea of incrementally getting better day by day, 1%. If I get better 1% today, I did it, right?
definitely.
Like, I'm happy. And I probably would tell my young self to read Atomic Habits is one of the things I would say,
Awesome.
or other books like that, and get that type of perspective.
Awesome. Great. And who do you learn from at this point in your career?
Everybody, right? I try to learn from everybody, whether it's clients or attorneys. Attorneys have been a great resource for
Right.
me. You talk about affordable. Richard Singer in the affordable housing world has been so kind to me with his time and his
Great.
knowledge. Same thing with clients. Some of our biggest clients, Alan Arker, Ron Molis, Rick Gropper, like they're just great resources to bend their ears sometimes and think about how they view things and
Mm,
et cetera. Um, and even people outside of our
the industry.
industry,
Yeah.
you learn from family members. I learned from my parents to this day, right? See, I learned from them growing up, right? How to be a parent.
Right.
Now I'm learning from them how to, I'm not a grandparent yet, but I'm gonna learn how, they
Sure.
they go about being a
Yeah.
grandparent, or other people outside of the industry. You meet people in different walks of life, and you can pick up habits from them as well. Like, so I think in general, just being much more open
Mm,
and understanding that, you might have to change your perception sometimes,
sure.
right? And somebody, I saw a TED talk recently, and it was a great TED talk that, the ability to change your mind is like a superpower,
Sure.
right? Because we get so stuck in our bias, right? That it's sometimes hard to see past that. But, taking a step back and taking the big picture and being open to change,
Sure.
I think is something that's really important and has become important to me.
Definitely. So, do you think as a businessman, it's important to be malleable and kind of put your ego aside and realize that there's perspectives outside of your own that you have to
Oh,
adopt?
absolutely. Absolutely. It's like adapting to, it's like water to the glass, like
Yeah.
Bruce Lee said, right? You want to be malleable, like you said, you want to be open. You don't want to get in your own way, right? Like, as a young person in this
Right.
industry, I thought I knew already everything, right? I didn't know anything,
Yeah.
like I knew not even 1 millionth, of what is necessary or what is out there and
Right.
information wise. So, I think what I would also tell young people is that, you know, speak to as many people as you can, right? Get as many perspectives as you can. You know, they, they might have a totally different approach, totally different perspective. Their perspective might be jaded
Right.
and, totally skewed, but it's okay. It's all
Take it all in.
information gathering. You take it back and you kind of figure out what you want to do with it.
100%. 100%. And what idea do you believe, whether grounded in data or intuition, that many people you respect disagree with you on?
Well, that's a great question. Um, okay. Well, not everybody disagrees with this, but I think there's a future in rent stabilized housing
Okay.
in New York City.
Okay. Yeah.
Like, I really do. And I know it's hard for some people to think that way because of the recent
Yeah.
legislation, especially compounded by rising interest rates and rising expenses. It's a hard business today. But I think, again, everybody needs a place to live. And I think at some point our legislators will see that some of the laws that were implemented are counterproductive,
Yeah.
right? And there will be a change there. I don't know if it's 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, but I do think that, at some point, there will be some changes and there will be a future there. Right now, again,
Awesome.
it's tough to say it. Some buildings, like the problem now is that some of these properties have big loans on them, right? And when you think about the basis of those loans, they don't have a future,
Yeah.
right? But when it gets reset, it will have a future when laws change. Hopefully, in the future, that'll change as well.
Understood. Got it. What does retirement look like for you?
What's retirement? um, I think retirement looks to me like spending time
Family.
only where I want to
Mm,
and what I'm passionate about. I don't think I ever want to totally get out of the business,
Hmm.
right? What I do and what I focus on might change, but I think it's in my blood at this point. So whether it's brokering big deals or running a team or investing on deals,
Right.
it will through until the day I die, right? Commercial real estate will be something that I'm
Awesome.
thinking about every day. But when I think about retirement, I think about my kids, right? And I,
Right.
I, I want to see them thriving, and I want to be able to support them and any facet that I can, and that's what's important. And my wife, I want to, like, look, if the last few years have taught us anything, it's a balance,
Yeah.
right? And we love making money. I love the grind, right? And if I didn't love the grind, I wouldn't be in this business, right? But at the same time, the time with the family is rewarding, right? And that's really what resonates for the long term. So I want to just always have that right balance. I need to satisfy my deal junkie
Sure.
urges,
Yeah.
right? By always doing something, and but I need to
Take
to
care
be
of your family.
rewarded,
Yeah.
by seeing my family and take care of my family.
Awesome. Understood. And Victor, I have my final question to wrap it up.
You got
What
some
ad-
hard questions, John. I'm afraid about your final question.
No, it's not that bad. What advice would you give your 22-year-old self about life, business, and relationships?
um, I would tell myself that it's a long game,
Mm,
right? Take it step by step. I would say about relationships that be cognizant of what you say, and how it can be taken, right? By specific people. And what was that last thing? Life, relationships, and
life,
what else?
business, relationships.
Business. I would say, find a business that you're passionate
Mm,
about and that you enjoy every day, going to work every day. And that's it.
awesome. Great. Victor, this has been amazing. And anybody at any point in their career can get value from this and apply this to their careers moving forward. Really appreciate doing this.
Thank you, John. It's been really
Appreciate it.
fun. Thank you.
Great.